The jury's been sworn in, the alternates too. Opening statements now set for Monday in the first ever criminal trial of an ex-president.
It's a rigged case, and this is a case that was put in very strongly because of politics.
A tough task for both sides. Prosecutors must prove a crime was committed and concealed. And the defense, they have to paint the picture of a man most of the country already has an opinion on. And out of hundreds of New Yorkers, just 18 were selected to decide the case. We'll talk about the position they're in and the pressure they now face. Trump on trial starts now. The stage is set for opening statements in the first criminal trial of an ex-president. Jury selection is now finished. Today, 5 alternate jurors were seated. A full jury is now in place. 12 jurors and 6 potential fill-ins. The judge overseeing the case says opening statements will start on Monday. After today's session, Donald Trump said this.
We have violent criminals all over the streets of New York and nothing happens to them. Even when they catch them, they let them go. No bail whatsoever. So this is just a concerted witch hunt.
Similar statements as we've heard from the former president after court each day this week. National political correspondent Alex Miller has been following this trial all week from New York. Alex, what did court end with today?
Well, this afternoon, after the jury was selected, we had what's called a Sandoval hearing. This is really a New York-specific issue. Basically, if there is a history of misconduct with the defendant, they have to outline what exactly they're planning to talk about if the defendant decides to testify. The former president has said that he plans to testify in his own trial. Of course, according to the Constitution, he does not have to. But so what this hearing today was they had to disclose what exactly the prosecution is planning to bring up in front of the jury. And they said they plan on bringing up his other cases, including that civil fraud case that we saw at the end of last year, as well as the E. Jean Carroll trial cases. And so they brought that information before the judge, told them what they're planning to talk about. And the judge said that he has decided not to make a ruling this evening, that instead he's going to wait until Monday to rule on this. But that was really the main crux of what we saw this afternoon. Obviously, that was a very shaky afternoon, or it started out that way after what we saw here this afternoon, just a couple of feet from where I'm standing right now. A man set himself on fire. That entire ordeal lasted just a couple of minutes, but the smoke and the smell continued for a couple of hours after. This entire place was already full of police officers, but it continued. The presence was very heavy throughout the day. All of that happening as the jury was officially selected, that 7 men, 5 women panel, as well as the 6 alternates that are now going to be sitting for this entire potentially 6-week-long trial.
Yeah, it was some tense moments outside there this afternoon, Alex. So here we go. Opening statements expected on Monday. What can we expect?
Well, we don't have a lot of information. We don't expect the opening statements to take very long, half days both Monday and Tuesday because of Passover. They'll start around 9:30 in the morning and they'll break at 2 p.m. both of those days. No court on Wednesday. Opening statements, each side gets time to present their opening statements. And the Trump team wanted to hear which witnesses are going to be the first ones to be called. This is something they asked for yesterday. They asked for 3 witnesses. They were denied. They brought it up again today after that Sandoval hearing, asking if they could please have those witnesses. The district attorney's office reiterated it is just a courtesy and they do not have to do that, and that they don't trust the former president enough to give that information. What they ended up landing on is that Sunday evening they will give the attorneys the name of their first witness, which they were careful to say you're not going to even get to cross-examination on Monday anyway, so if that gives you an idea of what timing might look like. But this is effectively a test for the former president. They said flat out, if you release the name of this person, we will never give you another name ever again. And so this is really an important test for the defense to see if they can control their client, if the former president understands how serious this is and how serious the case is for witness intimidation. This is something the judge is incredibly concerned about, and he said as much straight from the bench. There's also going to be a hearing Tuesday morning before they bring the jury in and continue with the trial relating to Trump's gag order. Since the trial began on Monday, there are more than 7 violations that they say have occurred of this gag order, and they have filed motions to hold him in contempt, and so that will also have to be sorted out. So all of these little things take time, and they could delay the proceedings, you know, not for a long time, but it makes everything take a little bit longer. But that's the plan for the first 2 days. We're going to have opening statements, and then they'll start bringing those witnesses.
All right, national political correspondent Alex Miller for us live in New York. Alex, thank you. Here to talk more about what we can expect on Monday is Scripps News legal analyst Michael Scotto. He is a former Manhattan assistant district attorney, as well as the former Rackets bureau chief, and Renato Mariotti, a former federal prosecutor. Thank you both for taking the time to be with me tonight. Renato, I want to start with something that Alex just talked about, that the name of the first witness, the Manhattan district attorney's office, will let Trump's team know. Considering he is one not typically to hold back, why even extend that courtesy?
Well, it's a courtesy that is extended in any case, almost any case I could have possibly imagined. In fact, I've been practicing criminal law over 20 years. I don't recall a trial in which the defense was not told what witnesses would be called the next day. And that's not just a courtesy, it's something that streamlines the trial. So instead of the defense preparing for one of dozens of potential witnesses, they can actually hone in and prepare and make sure that they have a efficient and focused cross-examination ready. I think it's rather remarkable that the district attorney's office is not providing that to the defense. And similarly remarkable that the judge agrees with that. And I really think it's a reaction to Trump's repeated violation of the judge's orders. $1,000 fines are not deterring him. He's not following the court's orders, which is extraordinarily unusual. And so this is a way in which both the prosecutors and the judge have some leverage that might spur Trump to comply with the court's orders.
Now, Michael, so much has led up to this moment when opening statements will be made on Monday. What should the prosecution say?
Well, the prosecution is going to, for the first time, be able to tell the jury what they believe the case is about and what the evidence is that'll support a verdict of guilty. So they're going to lead them through, basically everything that's going to come out. They're going to weave a story. They're going to talk a lot about the hush money payments. And frankly, that's really, I want to say that's all they have to talk about. But, the proof here that I think is lacking is the former president's specific intent to turn this into a felony, to commit another crime or to aid the commission of another crime. So you're not going to hear a lot of that because, frankly, I don't think that evidence is going to come into the trial. So we're going to hear a lot about the scheme by which former President Trump, when he was a candidate, tried to smear his primary opponents. That's one of the things the district attorney previewed that they'd be putting into evidence. And also, the details of these, the hush payments and the fact that Michael Cohen was, reimbursed for the payment in the form of wages, right? And that's really what they have. I think what's really lacking here, and why, again, I don't think this is a slam dunk by any means, is the fact that it's going to be very hard for them to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that the president had this conscious objective to aid or commit or conceal another crime. And I think, you won't be hearing a lot of that in the government, in the people's opening, but you will hear a lot of that in the defense's opening.
And on the other side, Renato, I mean, how should Donald Trump's team present him as a defendant to this jury?
I think if I was on the defense side, what I would be focused on is whether Trump knew about the false entries in business records. The hush money scheme itself is not the crime here. It's the false entries that are made in the books and records of the Trump organization. And I think what the defense is going to want to do in terms of avoiding a conviction of the misdemeanor charge, which is sort of essentially the primary charge here, is they're going to try to say, look, he had no idea what was going on with the books and records of the Trump organization. Yes, he did not want these embarrassing stories. Maybe they'll list their slanderous stories out to the public. But he was not actually trying to conceal this in the books and records of the Trump organization. In fact, he was very busy running for president and then becoming president. He wasn't concerned about those books and records. And of course, that does dovetail into the concealment issue that was just discussed. In other words, what turns this misdemeanor into a Class E felony is the fact that it is allegedly done to conceal a subsequent crime, and was just discussed. I think the defense is going to spend quite a bit of time trying to argue that Trump was, to the extent he was involved in concealing anything for any reason, it was to avoid embarrassment. It was not to further a campaign finance defense. Obviously, I think the prosecution is going to be focused on the fact that, as a practical matter, no one was looking at the books and records of the Trump organization. They're going to say there's no other reason to hide it, and it'll be a sort of an argument from inference on the prosecution side, but the defense will be hammering that hard.
And Michael, Alvin Bragg this is his office that is bringing this case. What is on the line for him in this trial?
Well, it's an elected office. When Mr. Bragg ran to succeed Cy Vance, who decided not to run for another term, I believe one of the things he said was he had experience at the Attorney General's office bringing cases against former President Trump and his organizations. I think this is, I want to say, a signature case for him, but this is a case that D.A. Vance didn't bring. He waited and he gave D.A. Bragg the opportunity to decide whether to bring it or not. So, I don't want to put, his legacy, on the line. He's a one-term DA. Maybe he'll be there more years. But, this is certainly a case that, he trumpeted when it was brought. He said it was an important case, and a lot of resources have been put into this. So, I'll leave it to the political observers to comment. But I think it's an important case for him to bring. And I think if you bring a case like that, you damn well better win it.
And Michael, how likely is it that Donald Trump testifies?
I don't think he's going to testify at all. Frankly, although he does lots of things that don't make sense. It would, in my mind, depend to a great deal about the Sandoval determination, because the DA has asked the court to allow the jury to hear about not only the E.G. and Carroll defamation verdicts, but also the sexual abuse, and so. There's a lot there. 13 particular instances that the DA wants to cross-examine former President Trump if he takes the stand. I don't think he'll take the stand. I don't think he has to take the stand. This is a case where, the defense may not mount a defense. It'll be through cross-examination, and they'll just say, look, they didn't lay a glove on us. And frankly, his defense is the TV news at the end of the day. So I don't think he's going to testify.
Renato, I bring the same question to you.
Well, I think the wise choice would be for him not to testify. Perhaps I have a slightly different take on it. I think that if Donald Trump was a different person, if he was more disciplined in his speech, if he was more careful, more truthful, I think a hypothetical defendant in that circumstance, perhaps could testify. It's not like he has prior convictions. I think there are some explanations he could give, and he could say that other people can't. But as a practical matter, I agree that given the baggage that he brings there, a lot of false statements in the past that he could be impeached with, the fact, obviously, the defamation and sexual abuse, which was just discussed, I think that is substantial as well. And the fact that he's just undisciplined. I think if I was representing someone like him, I just could not rely on him following my advice or not taking the bait. We saw the deposition testimony in the E.G. and Carroll civil case, and that was a disaster for Trump's position in that case. So I think the safe bet, was discussed to use cross-examination and potentially other witnesses to try to establish enough to suggest, as I had alluded to earlier, that Trump wasn't aware of those false statements in the books and records, and that he wasn't trying to commit a campaign finance offense.
All right, we'll see what happens. Opening statements expected for Monday. Former Manhattan Assistant District Attorney Michael Scotto and Scripps News legal analyst, as well as former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti. Thank you both for taking the time. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Still to come, they have gone from living everyday lives to now deciding the fate of a former president. Up next, we'll dive into the new reality for the members of the Trump jury. The 12 jurors and 6 alternates in Donald Trump's hush money trial will have a front row seat to history. In fact, they're now part of history. But these next 6 weeks or so are likely to be packed with pressure for them personally. So we want to look into truly the disruption that this trial is going to cause to their lives. I'm joined now by Alan Turkheimer, a litigation consultant with Trial Methods. Thanks for taking the time to join me. These jurors had to answer more than 40 questions in front of Donald Trump. Lawyers went through their social media. They had to answer to that in the courtroom. How does the scrutiny that this jury went through this week compare to what you've seen in high-profile cases?
Well, they certainly went through a lot, and they were asked a lot of questions, and as the process became smaller and smaller in terms of the eligible pool, they were the ones that survived. And what's interesting is most of these jurors, in fact, I look at the first 12, and they're all employed. A lot of them have high-powered jobs, and it's often the case where juries, they're overrepresented by retirees or maybe some people who are unemployed or underemployed. But I don't see that here. So this is a jury that I think realizes the significance and what their calling is, and I think they're going to do a good job. I think give our system of criminal justice some credit here that we ended up with these 12 folks and 6 other alternates to hear this historic trial.
What will their lives look like during this trial, which could last as long as 8 weeks?
It seems like some of them are going to have to just put a lot on hold. Now it's their personal lives come to a halt, and some of them might have to work at night. And I think that there might be some days off. I know the Wednesdays have been designated as a possible day where he's not going to hold trial, but they're going to really have to jam a lot in. And this is consuming. I mean, as you can imagine, the first criminal trial of a former president of the United States. So it's going to take a heavy toll on them in their regular lives, psychologically. But it seems like these jurors, just from what I've read and what I know about their jobs, it seems like they're up to the task.
And there's been this question about bias and the effort from both sides to try and figure out who might have an opinion that would be too much. There's a juror who called, this is a juror, someone who will be on the jury. They said about Donald Trump, quote, "They think he's selfish and self-serving, and I don't really appreciate that in a public servant. I don't know him as a person. As far as his integrity, how he portrays himself in public is not my cup of tea," end quote. How could having a personal opinion like that from a juror impact this case?
Well, the defense hopes that this juror is not overly influential in the deliberation, but it's also true that jurors can compartmentalize, and glad this juror was candid, and I think maybe the defense ran out of strikes, but the defense is going to have to hope that this juror is able to set that aside, look at the evidence, not have any personal feelings or personal distaste of the former president enter into the way this juror assesses the evidence or hears the witness testimony. And jurors are generally good at that. It's not something that the defense wanted to deal with, and in a perfect world from the defense perspective, they would have had another strike or this juror would not have made it on. But the hope is from Trump's perspective, this juror can look at the evidence, and maybe fellow jurors will also have an influence on this juror's outlook, because there's a lot of cases. Now, this is obviously different, but a lot of criminal defendants, they have unsavory acts, or there are things about their persona that jurors just don't like, and they can usually get past that. But it's not ideal from the defense perspective, but it's not an insurmountable hurdle either to have someone like this sitting on the jury.
How would you characterize the pressure these jurors will be under during this trial?
Certainly a lot of pressure. As we saw yesterday, the juror that was dismissed just because some of her family members, I believe, realized that it was her on this jury. There is pressure. There's no doubt about it. Sometimes, and I don't know if the jurors were asked this, but there's always pressure to go back home after a verdict. And these jurors are going to face pressure from friends, from family, from the community in New York County, a very blue county, if they come back and acquit Donald Trump of the charges, or conversely, will some face pressure if they have all these guilty verdicts? It's in the back of their minds, and it certainly exists. But I think day in and day out, when the jurors get in their routines, they're going to be able to really focus on what they have to do in court and hold the prosecution to its burden and give Donald Trump his presumption of innocence. And then at the end of the day, when they deliberate, they'll have to render a historic decision.
It will certainly be historic. Alan Turkheimer, litigation consultant for Trial Methods. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it, and we'll be right back. Court resumes 9:30 Monday morning. The full jury, 12 jurors and 6 alternates, are now set. Jury selection was expected to last as long as 2 weeks, but it just took 4 days. Trump is accused of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged sexual encounter with adult film star Stormy Daniels. He's denied making hush money payments and denied the affair. Prosecutors filed 34 felony charges against him. If convicted, he faces up to 4 years behind bars. Outside court on Tuesday, Trump visited a bodega where an employee initially faced charges in a deadly 2022 stabbing inside the store. The man claimed he was defending himself from an attacker. The charges were later dropped. Trump used the moment somewhat like a campaign appearance, saying it's an example of the Manhattan DA of being soft on crime. Now, he's been vocal outside court and yesterday held up a pile of printed out opinion pieces from various news sites. One of them, the Wall Street Journal, says that Trump has the legal consensus on his side. Now, the hush money case is happening in the middle, of course, of a presidential race. Each day Trump's in court, he says he can't be on the campaign trail. President Biden spent 3 days this week in Pennsylvania. That will do it for Trump on Trial. We'll see you next week. Have a good night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Haley Bull and for Maritza Giorgio. A jury is now seated in the Manhattan criminal case against former President Donald Trump. 12 jurors and 6 alternates have been enlisted to hear the first criminal trial against a former president. Opening statements are expected on Monday. In the coming weeks, the jury will weigh whether the former president engaged in a cover-up, working with his then lawyer, Michael Cohen, and falsifying business records to hide a payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels to stay quiet about a prior affair. And while the Manhattan DA's office will argue this was part of a conspiracy to influence the 2016 election, Trump's defense team is set to deny he did anything illegal in keeping a personal matter quiet. With a full jury and a roster of alternates now set, the case moves toward opening statements. National political correspondent Alex Miller has been inside the courtroom for us all week. She explains what's happened so far and gives us a look at what comes next.
A jury has been selected. 7 men and 5 women will sit on the panel along with 6 alternates. This sets the stage for former President Donald Trump's first criminal trial to begin opening statements Monday. The jury includes Americans who have lived all over the country and the world. Multiple jurors over the course of the day Friday said they were anxious and they felt they could not be fair. They were subsequently dismissed. Social media posts came back into play Friday after one potential juror who volunteered with Get Out the Vote efforts for Hillary Clinton was shown social media posts of him at anti-Trump rallies and calling Trump egomaniacal, sociopathic, and the devil. He was promptly dismissed. The judge also heard arguments from both sides in what they want to be discussed should the former president decide to testify. He is not required to by law. The district attorney's office wants to bring in multiple cases involving Trump. Judge Juan Merchan says he'll make a decision Monday. They'll start with opening statements. Trump's team had asked for 3 witnesses, the first ones to be disclosed. The DA's office said no. They ended up agreeing to disclose the first witness basically as a test to see if the former president would post it on social media. He is not supposed to. They also have a gag order hearing for him Tuesday morning. The prosecution is seeking to hold him in contempt. Alex Miller, Scripps News, New York.
This is an historic trial with an historic defendant. So let's talk about how it may unfold. Joining us now, Adam Schlahet, the director of the Moore Advocacy Center at Fordham University School of Law. He's tried cases on both sides of the criminal justice system and is a national leader in trial advocacy education. Adam, let's begin with opening statements. What can we expect out of these?
Well, the point of an opening statement is to preview the case that the jury is about to hear. So the prosecution is going to want to tell a compelling story of not just what happened and how the law was broken, but why it really matters. And they're going to want to really capture why his actions were fundamentally unfair and made the election fundamentally unfair, right? If they don't capture that unfairness, these are not particularly sexy charges, right? Falsifying business records. So the challenge is really going to be to show the jury why these falsifying of these business records and this conspiracy was so important and violated the voters' rights.
You're getting at the crux of my next question here, because we know you've been on both sides of the courtroom. So beginning with Trump's team, what are the considerations they need to take into account now with this jury, now that we have seen who is seated on it?
Well, like a lot of Manhattan juries, this one's pretty sophisticated, right? There's a lot of professionals on this jury, and the defense is going to be pretty technical. They're going to be talking about how the actual payments in and of themselves, that Donald Trump may have not had the actual criminal mindset when signing those checks. They're going to talk about how it doesn't necessarily fit with the federal election fraud elevation, right? And they're also going to be attacking the credibility of all the prosecution witnesses, namely Michael Cohen as a perjurer.
So let's talk about the prosecution then, from their perspective. Given how technical this case is, what are the points they need to hit then with this jury specifically?
Well, I think that they know that Michael Cohen is a real vulnerability in their case. This is an individual who's spoken on and said the 100% opposite on a number of facts. Has gone on record about all the allegations about Stormy Daniels were 100% false, right? And now he's saying the exact opposite. And he has a perjury conviction. But I think the prosecution really needs to hammer home that these are the people that Donald Trump surrounded himself with, right? He has a liar and a cheater carry out lying and cheating. So, prosecutors do this all the time. They often have cooperators who have real credibility issues. But the message has to be that the prosecution doesn't get to choose their witnesses. Donald Trump chose this witness when he hired Michael Cohen and asked Michael Cohen to break the law for him.
And one of the things, of course, that makes this case unique is the backdrop, the 2024 campaign. The case itself, at least according to the DA, is about alleged interference in the 2016 campaign. How do you expect politics to be navigated in the courtroom going forward?
Well, with something as big as the political landscape and the entire political future of this country potentially hanging in the balance, it's such a big elephant in the room that I would suspect that both sides, or at least the prosecution, is really not going to bring that into focus. They're going to be laser focused on the charges, the elements that they need to prove, and establishing with the jury why these crimes were ultimately unfair to the American people, and specifically the people of New York. The defense, on the other hand, may try to... Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
The defense, I think, may be bringing politics into this room in this narrative of victimhood and that Donald Trump is being treated unfairly. But, I think their defenses may also be very, very technical. And they're not trying to show that Donald Trump is innocent, because Donald Trump is not an innocent person by any definition. What they are trying to show is that the prosecution has not proven his guilt in this case.
But bottom line, it is a high-profile case here. There's a lot of attention, but defense attorneys always have to grapple with whether or not to have the defendant testify. So let's look at hypotheticals here. What factors would determine if former President Trump testifies?
Well, ultimately, the decision of whether or not the defendant testifies is the defendant's decision. There is not a criminal defense attorney on the planet that would encourage Donald Trump to testify in this case. But Donald Trump may choose to, and there's no stopping him if he wants to testify. The problem with having the defendant testify is that all of that work that the defense is going to do to try to establish with the jury that the prosecution needs to prove his guilt, all of that kind of goes out the window once the defendant testifies. Because once the defendant testifies, then the jury's really going to be deciding, is the defendant telling me the truth when they say they're not guilty? And that's a very difficult thing to overcome.
A lot to watch for here going forward in this case. Adam Schlett, director of the Moore Advocacy Center at Fordham University School of Law, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. We'll be closely following this and all the other cases against the former president on our new show, Trump on Trial. We'll have updates and analysis on everything that happens inside and outside of the courtroom. Join us for that Monday through Friday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern.